The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the soft blue glow of translation matrices as representatives from 47 different worlds gathered for what many considered the most important session in the past 3 centuries. Ambassador Zethkri of the Hegemony adjusted his ceremonial robes, the fabric shimmering with embedded neural fibers that responded to his emotional state. Today, those fibers pulsed with worry. "The situation grows more desperate by the solar cycle," announced High Counselor Veltar, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into dancing rainbows across the walls. "The Ravagers have claimed another 12 systems in the Outer Rim. Their advance seems unstoppable." Around the circular chamber, representatives shifted uncomfortably. The Ravagers were unlike any enemy the galaxy had faced in recorded history. They consumed everything in their path, not just resources or territory, but entire civilizations. Worlds that fell to them became barren husks, stripped of all life down to the microbial level. "What of the Corvan Defense Fleet?" asked Ambassador Theus, his reptilian features grave with concern. The Corvans were renowned throughout the galaxy as the finest warriors among the civilized races, their battle prowess legendary. High Counselor Veltar's form dimmed noticeably. "Admiral Krex's forces engaged the Ravager Vanguard at the Sigma Draconis system 3 rotations ago. Of the 230 vessels that entered the battle zone, only 17 returned. Admiral Krex was not among the survivors." A collective intake of breath swept through the chamber. The loss of Krex and his fleet sent shockwaves through every representative present. If the Corvans couldn't stand against the Ravagers, what hope did the rest of them have? "Perhaps it's time we consider the unthinkable," suggested Ambassador Morden, his insectoid mandibles clicking nervously. "We could attempt to negotiate with them, offer tribute in exchange for our survival." "You speak of surrender," growled General Thane, the military representative of the Ursine Confederation. His massive bear-like frame bristled with indignation. "The Ravagers don't negotiate. They consume. There is no reasoning with a force of nature." "Then what do you suggest, General?" Veltar asked. "Our combined fleets have barely slowed their advance. The technological advantages we possess seem meaningless against their numbers and their hunger." The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. For all their advances, for all their civilized achievements, they found themselves facing an enemy that operated by rules they couldn't comprehend. The Ravagers appeared to have no centralized command, no apparent strategy beyond endless consumption. They moved like a plague across the galaxy, and conventional military doctrine proved useless against them. "There is one option we haven't fully explored," came a soft voice from the far side of the chamber. All eyes turned to see Ambassador Sarah Chen, the human representative, rising from her seat. At barely 5.5 feet tall, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, she looked more like someone's grandmother than a galactic diplomat. Several representatives exchanged glances. The humans were the newest addition to the Galactic Council, having achieved interstellar travel only 3 centuries ago. In galactic terms, they were infants. Their technology was primitive compared to most Council races, their military forces laughably small, and their homeworld, Earth, was considered a backwater planet notable mainly for its biodiversity. "With respect, Ambassador Chen," Zethkri said carefully, "humanity's contribution to this crisis has already been generous. The food supplies and medical aid you've provided have been invaluable to refugee populations." Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made several of the more perceptive representatives pause. "Thank you, Ambassador Zethkri, but I wasn't referring to humanitarian aid." "The human military is valiant," General Thane said diplomatically, "but your forces number in the thousands, not the millions we need. Your technology, while ingenious, lacks the firepower necessary for ship-to-ship combat on this scale." "That's true," Sarah agreed pleasantly. "We've never been much for large-scale fleet actions. Humanity has always preferred a more personal approach to conflict resolution. High Counselor Veltar's crystalline form shifted, reflecting her confusion. "I'm afraid I don't understand, Ambassador." Sarah walked slowly toward the center of the chamber, her soft footsteps somehow commanding attention despite their quietness. "You see, there's something about humanity that perhaps hasn't been fully communicated to this council, an aspect of our nature that we've kept subdued during our integration into galactic society." She paused at the central podium, her hands clasped behind her back. "Every species represented in this chamber evolved as either prey or predator. Your evolutionary paths led you to become farmers, builders, thinkers, healers. Even the Corvins, magnificent warriors though they are, evolved from herd animals that learned to defend their young." The chamber was completely silent now, every representative hanging on her words. Humanity evolved differently. We weren't the strongest, fastest, or largest predators on our world. We became the most efficient ones. We learned to hunt not just for food, but for survival against creatures far more powerful than ourselves. More importantly, we learned to eliminate threats to our pack, our family, our species. Ambassador Theiss shifted uncomfortably. "Are you suggesting that humans are somehow more violent than other species?" "We've seen no evidence of this in your 3 centuries of council membership." Sarah's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "That's because we've been on our best behavior. You see, when we joined the galactic community, we made a conscious decision to suppress certain aspects of our nature. We wanted to be accepted, to learn, to grow alongside you. We put aside the part of ourselves that our ancestors called the killer instinct." "You speak in riddles, human," General Thane rumbled. "What exactly are you proposing?" Sarah activated a small device from her pocket. The chamber's central holographic display came to life, showing the current disposition of Ravager forces and their projected advance routes. "You've been fighting the Ravagers as if they were a conventional military force. Formations, tactics, strategic objectives. But they're not an army. They're a swarm, a plague. And the galaxy has spent so long in peace that you've forgotten how to deal with such threats." She manipulated the display, highlighting key Ravager concentration points. "But Earth remembers. In our archives, our history, our very genetic memory, we carry the knowledge of how to fight an extinction-level threat. Not with honor, not with noble tactics, but with whatever means necessary to ensure survival." The display shifted, showing a detailed analysis of Ravager behavioral patterns that human observers had compiled. The data was far more comprehensive than anything the Council's own intelligence services had produced. "The Ravagers do have weaknesses," Sarah continued, "but exploiting them requires a mindset that civilized species find uncomfortable. It requires thinking like an apex predator. It requires becoming the thing that even monsters fear." High Counselor Veltar leaned forward, her crystalline form pulsing with interest. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ambassador Chen?" "Earth formally requests permission to deploy a specialist to deal with the Ravager threat. One individual who represents the aspect of humanity we've kept hidden. Someone we've codenamed Wolverine." "One person?" Zethkri's voice rose in disbelief. "Against an enemy that has destroyed entire fleets? This is madness." Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Ambassador, with all due respect, your conventional approaches have failed spectacularly. The Ravagers have consumed 47 systems and show no signs of slowing. In another standard galactic year, they'll reach the inner core worlds. At that point, this council chamber will be nothing but empty space." She gestured to the holographic display. "Wolverine isn't a soldier in any sense that you would recognize. He's something far older, far more dangerous. He's what humans become when we stop pretending to be civilized." The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs and heated debates. Some representatives voiced outrage at the suggestion that one being could succeed where entire armadas had failed. Others expressed concern about unleashing what sounded like a barbarian into their civilized galaxy. A few, however, studied the human ambassador with new interest, perhaps beginning to sense that there were depths to humanity they had never suspected. General Thane raised his massive hand for silence. Let us assume, for the sake of argument, that this Wolverine possesses abilities we cannot comprehend. What assurances do we have that such an individual could be controlled, that he wouldn't become a threat to Council worlds once the Ravagers are dealt with? Sarah's smile returned, but it was different now, sharper, with an edge that made several representatives step back involuntarily. General, you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether Wolverine can be controlled. The question is whether you're desperate enough to unleash something that was never meant to be controlled. She moved back to her seat, but remained standing. Earth has spent 3 centuries proving that we can be peaceful, productive members of galactic society. We've contributed art, culture, literature, and humanitarian aid. We've followed every law, respected every custom, and bent over backward to fit into your vision of civilization. Her voice grew quieter, but somehow more intense. But before we were gardeners and poets and diplomats, we were survivors. We were the species that looked at creatures that could tear us apart with their bare hands and decided to hunt them anyway. We were the species that faced extinction from ice ages, supervolcanoes, and cosmic impacts, and not only survived but thrived. The chamber was utterly silent now. The Ravagers represent an extinction-level threat to every species in this galaxy, Sarah continued. They're coming for all of us, and conventional military force has proven inadequate. So I ask you this, are you prepared to do whatever it takes to survive? Are you ready to let humanity unleash the monster we've kept caged for 3 centuries? High Counselor Veltar's form had shifted to a deep amber color, indicating deep contemplation. If we were to approve such a deployment, what guarantees would we have? What oversight would exist? None, Sarah replied simply. Wolverine operates under a different set of rules than the rest of us. He represents the part of human nature that doesn't recognize laws, treaties, or diplomatic niceties. He recognizes only one imperative: eliminate the threat to his species and those under his protection. She paused, letting that sink in. But I can tell you this. Once the Ravagers are dealt with, Wolverine will return to Earth and resume his containment, not because he's been ordered to, but because that's what he chooses. Humanity learned long ago that our deadliest weapons must be aimed carefully. Ambassador Mordoon's mandibles clicked rapidly. This is unprecedented. We would be authorizing the deployment of what amounts to an uncontrolled agent into the most critical military situation in our history. Yes, Sarah agreed. You would be. And in doing so, you would be acknowledging that sometimes survival requires abandoning the very principles we claim to defend. It requires becoming something we'd rather not be. General Thane stood slowly, his massive frame imposing even in the vast chamber. If the Council were to approve such a deployment, what would be the operational parameters? How would this Wolverine engage an enemy that has proven immune to our tactics? Sarah activated her device again, and the holographic display shifted to show a new tactical framework. Wolverine doesn't think in terms of fleets or formations. He thinks in terms of critical vulnerabilities and psychological warfare. The Ravagers may seem like a mindless swarm, but they do have leadership, command structures, and nerve centers. The display highlighted several key points within Ravager-controlled space. He would infiltrate their territory, identify their command hierarchy, and systematically eliminate it, not through grand battles or heroic charges, but through methods that civilized species find distasteful. You're describing assassination and terrorism, Zethkri said, his voice filled with horror. I'm describing war. Sarah replied coolly. "Real war. The kind that species fight when their very existence is at stake. Not the polite, rule-bound conflicts you've grown accustomed to in your age of prosperity, but the brutal, desperate struggle for survival that shaped every species in this galaxy before they reached the stars." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each representative. "Humanity offers you a choice. You can continue fighting with honor and dignity as your worlds burn around you. Or you can let us remind the galaxy what it means to face an enemy that refuses to surrender, refuses to retreat, and refuses to die quietly." The silence that followed was deafening. Representatives exchanged glances, communicated through private channels, and wrestled with a decision that could change the very nature of their civilization. Finally, High Counselor Veltar spoke. "The Council will recess to consider this proposal. All representatives will reconvene in one standard galactic hour to vote on whether to authorize Earth's specialist to engage the Ravager threat." As the representatives filed out of the chamber, many cast nervous glances at the small human woman who had just offered to unleash something that sounded more like a force of nature than a person. Ambassador Sarah Chen remained in her seat, calmly reviewing data on her personal device, as if she had just proposed a routine trade agreement rather than fundamentally altering the galaxy's approach to warfare. In the corridors outside the chamber, heated debates erupted. Some representatives argued that desperation was no excuse for abandoning their principles. Others pointed out that their principles wouldn't matter much if every council world was consumed by the Ravagers. A few, the more pragmatic ones, quietly began researching what little information was available about Earth's military history. What they found in the archives would give them nightmares for years to come. Meanwhile, in a secure communication chamber, Sarah transmitted a heavily encrypted message to Earth. The response came back within minutes. "Wolverine is ready, awaiting authorization to deploy." As she closed the communication channel, Sarah allowed herself a moment of genuine sadness. Humanity had worked so hard to prove they belonged among the civilized races of the galaxy. They had suppressed their more violent instincts, channeled their aggressive drives into art and exploration and peaceful competition. But the universe, it seemed, was not interested in humanity's attempts at civilization. And when survival was at stake, all the philosophy and high-minded ideals in the galaxy meant nothing compared to the simple, brutal imperative to live. In an hour, the Council would vote. And if they chose to authorize Wolverine's deployment, the galaxy would learn why Earth had so carefully hidden the true nature of humanity's evolutionary heritage. The question wasn't whether Wolverine could deal with the Ravagers. The question was whether the galaxy would be the same afterward. The vote had been closer than many expected. 26 in favor, 19 opposed, with 2 abstentions. As the results echoed through the council chamber, Ambassador Sarah Chen felt no satisfaction, only a deep sense of inevitability. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what it really meant to be an apex predator. "The motion is carried," High Counselor Veltar announced, her crystalline form now a deep purple that indicated grave concern. "Earth is authorized to deploy its specialist against the Ravager threat. However, the Council wishes to establish certain protocols." "With respect, High Counselor," Sarah interrupted gently, "there are no protocols for what you've just authorized. Wolverine operates by his own rules now." 3 days later, a small, unremarkable human transport vessel emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, the last known position of Ravager forces before they had mysteriously vanished from Council sensors. The ship bore no military markings, no weapons signatures that any Council technology could detect. To all appearances, it was nothing more than a civilian courier vessel. Admiral Kessatar, commanding the closest Council observation post, studied the readings with growing confusion. "Signal the human vessel," she ordered her communications officer. "Request identification and intent." The response came back immediately in standard galactic common. "Transport vessel, Quiet Storm, requesting permission to proceed to Kepler 442b. We have a delivery to make." Delivery? Admiral Kessitar's scaled features creased in bewilderment. "To a Ravager-occupied world? They've sterilized everything on that planet?" "Copy that, Admiral," came the calm response. "Our passenger is aware of the situation. He still wants to proceed." Admiral Kessitar activated a direct communication channel to the transport. "Human vessel, I cannot in good conscience allow you to proceed. The entire system is under Ravager control. Any ship entering that space will be destroyed." There was a brief pause, then a different voice came over the comm, deeper with an accent that somehow sounded older than the words themselves. "Admiral, this is Wolverine. I appreciate your concern, but I have work to do." Something about that voice made Admiral Kessitar's scales stand on end. It was perfectly calm, almost conversational, but underneath lay something that her evolutionary instincts recognized as danger. "Sir, I must insist that you reconsider. Our latest intelligence suggests Ravager forces in this system number in the thousands." A low chuckle came through the comm. "Admiral, your intelligence is wrong. There are far more than thousands." The communication channel closed, and the Quiet Storm accelerated toward the inner system. Admiral Kessitar watched helplessly as the small human vessel disappeared from her sensors, apparently using some kind of stealth technology that her instruments couldn't penetrate. Inside the Quiet Storm, Captain Maria Santos watched her passenger make final preparations. She had been transporting unusual cargo for Earth's intelligence services for over a decade, but she had never carried a passenger quite like this one. He looked remarkably ordinary, about 6 feet tall, dark hair showing gray at the temples, wearing what appeared to be standard military fatigues without any rank insignia or unit markers. His gear was minimal, a single duffel bag and a metal case that he had politely but firmly refused to let anyone else handle. "ETA to planetary insertion is 37 minutes, Maria announced. "Are you sure you don't want me to wait for extraction?" Wolverine, she had never learned his real name, looked up from the small device he was calibrating. "No need, Captain. I'll find my own way home when the job's done." "How? This isn't exactly a populated system anymore. The Ravagers have stripped it clean." He smiled, and Maria felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't a cruel smile exactly, but it was the smile of someone who had made peace with doing terrible things. "I'm resourceful, Captain. Always have been." 20 minutes later, long-range sensors began detecting massive Ravager activity throughout the system. Ship movements that defied explanation, energy signatures unlike anything in Council databases, and what appeared to be some form of gravitational manipulation technology. "Jesus," Maria whispered, watching the readings. "How many ships do they have down there?" Wolverine joined her at the sensor station, studying the data with professional interest. "Hard to say exactly. They don't build ships the way we do. But based on these readings," he paused, making rapid calculations, "I'd estimate somewhere between 50 and 100,000 vessels, ranging from fighter-sized up to something approaching dreadnought scale." Maria stared at him. "And you're planning to take on 100,000 ships by yourself?" "Oh no," Wolverine replied, checking his equipment one more time. "I'm not planning to fight their ships at all. That would be suicide." The Quiet Storm approached Kepler 442b's atmosphere, using every stealth technique in Maria's considerable arsenal. The planet that had once been home to 12 million Council citizens now appeared as a gray, lifeless ball of rock. The Ravagers had strip-mined everything organic, leaving behind a scarred moonscape dotted with their massive industrial complexes. "Insertion point coming up," Maria announced. "You sure about this? I could drop you somewhere less concentrated." Wolverine shouldered his gear and moved toward the small ship's single escape pod. "The most dangerous place is often the safest, Captain. They won't be expecting anyone to drop right into their main command center." "How do you even know where their command center is? Our intelligence says they operate as a hive mind." "They do," Wolverine confirmed, sealing his helmet, "which means if you hit the right node, you can disrupt the entire network. The trick is finding which node is the primary controller." He paused at the pod hatch. "Captain, when you report back to the Council, tell them this. What they're about to see isn't war as they understand it. It's not noble, it's not clean, and it's not something they should ever ask for again. But it's necessary." The pod launched silently, using minimal thrust to avoid detection. Maria watched it disappear into the planet's atmosphere, then engaged maximum stealth protocols and withdrew to a safe distance. Her job was done. Whatever happened next was up to the man calling himself Wolverine. The escape pod landed in what had once been the capital city of a thriving council colony. Now it was a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and organic growth, as if someone had crossed an industrial complex with a cancer. Ravager bioships moved overhead like flying tumors, while ground forces that defied easy description scuttled between structures that pulsed with their own malevolent life. Wolverine emerged from the pod and immediately activated his cloaking device. The technology was far beyond anything in Council databases, a gift from Earth's most classified research programs. To Ravager sensors, he simply didn't exist. Moving through the ruins, he began his reconnaissance. The first thing he noticed was that the Ravagers weren't as alien as Council intelligence believed. They were tool users, they had hierarchies, and most importantly, they had ego structures. The larger ones commanded the smaller ones, and they competed for dominance within their groups. Competition meant weakness. Hierarchy meant critical points of failure. It took him 6 hours to map the command structure of the local forces. The Ravagers had converted the planet's former government complex into their primary coordination center. Bioships the size of office buildings served as mobile command posts, while smaller creatures scurried between them carrying what appeared to be information packets. But at the center of it all was something that made Wolverine smile grimly. The Ravagers had a queen. She was massive, easily the size of a small building, and clearly the source of the coordinating signals that kept the swarm functioning. Kill her, and every Ravager in the system would be reduced to mindless drones, easy prey for even the depleted Council forces. The problem was reaching her. She was surrounded by hundreds of guards, protected by multiple layers of bioarmor, and situated in the most heavily defended position on the planet. A direct assault would be impossible, even for someone with Wolverine's capabilities. Fortunately, Wolverine hadn't survived 3 decades as Earth's premier covert operative by attempting direct assaults. Over the next 36 hours, Wolverine moved through the Ravager complex like a ghost. He studied their routines, their communication patterns, their biological rhythms. He learned their weaknesses, and the Ravagers, for all their apparent invincibility, had many weaknesses. They were vulnerable to specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation. Their bioships required constant chemical feeds to maintain their organic components. Most importantly, they were hierarchical creatures that relied on chemical and electromagnetic communication to coordinate their actions. Wolverine's first move was subtle. Using devices from his metal case, he began introducing signal interference into their communication network. Nothing dramatic, just small glitches that made coordination slightly more difficult. A few missed orders here, a delayed response there. Within hours, fights began breaking out between different Ravager factions. The Queen's signals were getting scrambled, and without clear direction, the natural competitiveness of the species began to assert itself. His second move was more direct. Wolverine had identified the bioships that served as mobile command posts. Each one was essentially a living creature the size of a skyscraper, with a brain the size of a car. They were heavily armored against energy weapons and explosive devices, but they had one critical vulnerability. They breathed. It took him 2 days to synthesize the compound he needed, using materials salvaged from the ruined city. The Ravagers had been so thorough in their consumption of the planet that they had left behind only trace elements and rare minerals, exactly what Wolverine needed for his purposes. The compound was based on Earth research into biological warfare, research that had been classified above the level that even the Council knew existed. It was designed to be undetectable until activated, at which point it would interfere with the nervous systems of carbon-based life forms in very specific ways. Wolverine introduced the compound into the atmospheric processors that the bioships used to filter air for their organic components. The effect was delayed. He wanted all of the command ships to be affected simultaneously. While he waited for his chemical attack to take effect, Wolverine began the riskiest part of his mission, getting close to the Queen herself. The massive creature was housed in what had once been the planetary Capitol building, now transformed into a living hive of biomechanical technology. Getting past the guards required every trick Wolverine had learned in his long career. He moved like smoke through corridors that pulsed with alien life, avoiding patrol routes that shifted according to patterns only he had bothered to learn. His cloaking device kept him invisible to their sensors, but stealth was more than just technology. It was patience, timing, and the willingness to remain motionless for hours while death walked within inches of his position. It took him 18 hours to reach the Queen's chamber. She was even more impressive up close, a creature that combined organic and mechanical elements in ways that challenged understanding. Her body was partially integrated into the building's structure itself, with countless cables and bioconduits connecting her to the planet's entire communication network. And she was intelligent. As Wolverine studied her from his concealed position, he realized that the Queen was not just coordinating the swarm, she was thinking, planning, adapting. The Ravagers weren't mindless consumers. They were a highly intelligent species with their own agenda, their own goals, their own understanding of the universe. That made what he was about to do murder rather than pest control. Wolverine had killed many people over his long career. Terrorists, dictators, war criminals, and others who posed threats to innocent life. But he had never killed someone who was simply following their nature, doing what their species required to survive. For a moment, he hesitated. Then his communicator vibrated with an incoming message. Intelligence reports from Council space. The Ravagers had begun their assault on the core worlds. Billions of innocent lives hung in the balance. Wolverine activated the devices he had placed throughout the complex and began his attack. The chemical compound he had introduced to the bioships activated simultaneously, causing every mobile command post in the complex to experience catastrophic nervous system failures. The creatures died within minutes, taking with them the entire local communication network. As chaos erupted throughout the complex, Wolverine moved toward the Queen. She had realized something was wrong and was attempting to re-establish communication with her forces, but the signal interference devices he had scattered throughout the building made that impossible. When she finally detected his presence, it was too late. The weapon Wolverine used was not exotic or alien. It was a simple tungsten carbide blade, molecularly sharpened and coated with a toxin derived from Earth's most venomous creatures. It was designed to kill quickly and efficiently without unnecessary suffering. The Queen died within seconds, her massive form going still as the poison shut down her nervous system. With her death, the entire Ravager presence in the system began to collapse. Without coordination, the swarm ships began attacking each other in confusion. Ground forces wandered aimlessly, unable to receive or process orders. Within hours, what had been an unstoppable force of consumption had become a chaotic mess of dying organisms and failing technology. Wolverine made his way to the planet's primary communication array and sent a brief message to Admiral Kessatar's observation post. Package delivered. System is clear for Council forces. Then he settled down to wait for pickup, surrounded by the remains of an enemy that had seemed invincible just days before. In the observation post, Admiral Kessatar stared at her sensors in disbelief. The massive Ravager presence that had dominated the system for months was simply gone. No great battles, no heroic last stands, just systematic collapse. "Get me a communication channel to the Council chamber," she ordered her communications officer. "And someone find out where that human transport ship went." As the first Council ships entered the system to begin cleanup operations, they found evidence of what had happened in the ruined city. The remains of bioships that had died from the inside out, communication networks that had been systematically sabotaged, and in the former government complex, the body of a creature so massive that it took xenobiologists 3 days just to map its basic anatomy. But of the human who had done all this, there was no sign. Wolverine had vanished as completely as if he had never existed, leaving behind only the results of his work. The galaxy had asked for a solution to the Ravager threat. They had received a demonstration of what humanity was capable of when the gloves came off. News of the Kepler 442 incident spread through Council space faster than official reports could contain it. Within days, every major news network across the galaxy was broadcasting footage from the aftermath. Vast fields of dead Ravager bioships, their organic components withering in the alien sunlight, while automated drones scavenged the remains for analysis. But it was the briefings to military commanders that truly shook the foundation of galactic civilization. "Single operative," General Thane repeated slowly, his massive ursine features creased with disbelief. He was reviewing the preliminary reports in his private office aboard the dreadnought Iron Resolve. "One human infiltrated a fortified position containing over 100,000 enemy forces and eliminated their entire command structure in under 72 hours. His aide, a young Corvan officer named Sub-Commander Velek, nodded grimly. "Analysis of the wreckage suggests systematic sabotage of communication networks, targeted biological warfare against command creatures, and precise elimination of critical leadership elements. The enemy force collapsed completely within 6 hours of the primary target's termination." General Thane leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his considerable weight. The Ursine Confederation had produced some of the galaxy's finest military minds over the centuries, but nothing in their tactical doctrine had prepared them for this level of efficiency. "Sub-Commander, in your professional opinion, how many of our Special Forces operatives would be required to achieve similar results?" Velek consulted his datapad, though they both knew the answer. "General, our best estimates suggest that even with perfect intelligence and ideal conditions, we would need at least a full regiment, approximately 15,000 operatives, to have a reasonable chance of success, and that would likely result in total casualties." 15,000 versus 1, General Thane mused. "Either our intelligence is completely wrong, or humanity has been hiding capabilities that dwarf our understanding." The sub-commander's expression grew troubled. "General, there's something else. We've been monitoring human communication traffic since the operation concluded. They're referring to this Wolverine individual as if he were routine. Not their greatest warrior, not their most elite operative, just one of several similar assets." General Thane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "Several? The intercepted communications suggest that Earth maintains what they call the Dirty Dozen, 12 individuals with similar capabilities, each specialized for different types of threats. Wolverine appears to be their anti-swarm specialist." Meanwhile, in the council chambers, An emergency session was attempting to process the implications of what had just occurred. High Counselor Veltar had maintained her deep purple coloration for 3 straight days, a sign of stress that was beginning to worry her medical staff. The philosophical implications alone are staggering, Ambassador Mordun was saying, his insectoid mandibles clicking rapidly. We based our entire approach to galactic civilization on the assumption that intelligent species naturally evolve toward cooperation and peaceful coexistence. And now we learn that one species has evolved to become the perfect killers, added Ambassador Zethkri, his ceremonial robes cycling through agitated color patterns. The question before us is simple. What do we do with this knowledge? Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly in her designated seat, allowing the debate to wash over her. She had expected this reaction: fear, confusion, and the inevitable backlash that occurred when comfortable assumptions were shattered. The humans have honored their commitment, Admiral Kessatar reported via holographic projection from her observation post. The Ravager threat in the Kepler system has been completely neutralized. Our cleanup crews are working with minimal resistance from scattered, uncoordinated remnants. But at what cost? Demanded Representative Thiss. We've opened a door that can never be closed. We've legitimized methods of warfare that violate every principle our civilization stands for. Sarah finally spoke, her voice cutting through the heated debate like a blade. Representative Thiss, with respect, your civilization stood for those principles because you had the luxury of safety. The Ravagers took that luxury away. She stood slowly, commanding the attention of the chamber. Every species in this room evolved to survive in a hostile universe. You developed intelligence, cooperation, and technology as survival strategies. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that the universe remains hostile. You began to believe that your moral principles were laws of nature rather than choices made possible by prosperity and security. Are you suggesting that morality is merely a convenience? High Counselor Veltar asked. I'm suggesting that morality without the strength to defend it is just elaborate suicide, Sarah replied. Humanity has never forgotten that lesson. We've simply chosen to suppress our more violent capabilities in the interest of peaceful coexistence. She activated her personal display, showing updated intelligence reports. The Ravagers have 3 more primary staging areas in the Outer Rim. Each contains force concentrations similar to what was eliminated at Kepler 442. If the Council wishes, Earth can deploy additional specialists to neutralize these threats. The chamber fell silent as representatives processed this information. The implication was clear. Humanity possessed the capability to single-handedly end a threat that had seemed insurmountable just days earlier. What would be the cost of such deployments? General Thane asked carefully. Sarah's expression didn't change. No cost to the Council. This is what humanity does. We protect our pack, and whether you fully realize it or not, you became part of our pack the moment we joined this alliance. Ambassador Thies leaned forward. And afterward, when the Ravager threat is eliminated, what happens to these weapons you've unleashed? They go home, Sarah said simply. They return to Earth, resume their normal lives, and wait for the next existential threat, which, given the nature of the universe, will eventually come. How can we trust that they won't turn on Council worlds? Zethkri demanded. How do we know these killers won't decide that we're the next threat to be eliminated? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a sadness that surprised many of the representatives. Because, Ambassador, despite everything you've learned about humanity over the past few days, you still don't understand what drives us. You see killers where we see protectors. You see weapons where we see guardians. She gestured to the holographic displays showing the destruction at Kepler 442. Wolverine didn't enjoy what he did. He took no pleasure in the death of the Queen or the collapse of their civilization. He did what was necessary to protect innocent life, and then he disappeared, because that's what Guardians do. They don't seek recognition or reward. They just do the job and fade back into the shadows. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. 3 more deployment authorizations were approved by overwhelming margins. Fear of the Ravagers outweighed fear of humanity's hidden capabilities. Over the next 2 months, 3 more Ravager staging areas were systematically eliminated. Each operation was carried out by a different human specialist, each with their own methods and specializations. The second target fell to someone codenamed Ghost, who infiltrated the Ravager fleet command structure and introduced a computer virus that caused their ships to attack each other. The third was eliminated by Reaper, who somehow convinced rival Ravager factions to go to war against each other, resulting in mutually assured destruction. The fourth and final stronghold was handled by Phoenix, who detonated the system's star using gravitational manipulation technology that existed nowhere else in Council databases. With each operation, the galaxy's understanding of humanity shifted. These weren't random psychopaths or barely controlled berserkers. They were consummate professionals who approached the elimination of threats with the same methodical precision that other species applied to engineering or scientific research. But it was the aftermath of the final operation that truly demonstrated the depth of humanity's capabilities. As Council cleanup crews arrived at the Phoenix-eliminated system, they found something unprecedented: a detailed archive of Ravager technology, biological samples, and cultural information carefully preserved and cataloged for study. They were scientists. Dr. Cathara, the expedition's chief xenobiologist, reported to the Council. The Ravagers weren't mindless consumers. They were conducting some kind of galactic ecosystem management program. They consumed worlds that they determined were ecologically inefficient and converted the biomass into more productive forms. The revelation sent shockwaves through Council space. The Ravagers hadn't been an invasion force. They had been gardeners, pruning what they saw as an overgrown galactic ecosystem. Phoenix left a note with the archives, Dr. Cathara continued. It simply says, "Understanding your enemy is the first step toward making sure you never become them." In the weeks that followed, xenopsychologists and philosophers struggled to process the implications. The Ravagers had believed they were improving the galaxy, just as the Council believed they were protecting it. The only difference was their willingness to make hard choices about who deserved to survive. Ambassador Sarah Chen received a private communication from Earth during this period. The message was brief. Wolverine requests permission to remain off-world. He wishes to study the preserved Ravager archives and ensure no similar threats emerge in the immediate future. She approved the request without hesitation. She understood what the message really meant. Wolverine had seen something in the Ravager archives that concerned him. Some indication that they weren't the only species in the galaxy with such pragmatic approaches to survival. 3 months after the last Ravager stronghold fell, the Galactic Council convened to address the new reality of their universe. The chamber was fuller than it had been in decades, with representatives from species that had previously remained isolated now seeking the protection of the Alliance. "The Age of Innocence is over," High Counselor Veltar announced, her crystalline form now a steady blue that indicated resolution rather than uncertainty. "We can no longer pretend that good intentions and noble principles are sufficient to ensure survival. We must adapt to the reality that the universe contains threats that require unconventional responses." The reforms that followed were comprehensive. Military doctrines were rewritten to incorporate humanity's approaches to asymmetric warfare. Intelligence services were restructured to focus on threat prevention rather than just detection. Most significantly, the Council established the Guardian Protocol, a formal framework for deploying humanity's specialists against existential threats. But perhaps the most important change was psychological. The galaxy's species had learned that survival sometimes required abandoning the moral high ground, that protecting the innocent sometimes meant becoming something monstrous, and that the price of civilization was eternal vigilance against those who would destroy it. 6 months after the first Ravager encounter, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in her private quarters aboard the Council space station, reading reports from across the galaxy. Crime rates were down as potential criminals reconsidered their actions in light of humanity's demonstrated capabilities. Border conflicts had virtually disappeared as species realized that humans might consider such disputes a threat to galactic stability. Most interestingly, applications for Council membership had increased dramatically. Species that had previously rejected galactic civilization were suddenly eager to join an alliance that could offer such comprehensive protection. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority communication. The caller identification made Sarah smile for the first time in months. Wolverine. His face appeared on her screen, looking older and more tired than she remembered. Behind him, she could see the interior of some kind of research station. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. "I wanted to give you a status update." "Good to see you're still alive," she replied. "What did you find in the archives?" Wolverine's expression grew serious. The Ravagers weren't acting alone. They were part of something bigger, a galactic management system that's been operating for millions of years. Different species taking turns as the pruning force when populations get too large or technology becomes too dangerous. Sarah felt a chill. And now? Now the system is looking for a replacement. The Ravagers were just the most recent iteration. Before them, it was a species called the Harvesters. Before that, something called the Cleaners. He paused, studying her reaction. "Sarah, they're going to offer the job to humanity." The implications hit her immediately. Humanity's demonstrated capabilities, their willingness to make hard choices, their ability to eliminate threats efficiently and completely, from the perspective of a galactic management system, they would be perfect candidates to become the next pruning force. "What do you recommend?" she asked. Wolverine was quiet for a moment. "We refuse. We find another way. We break the cycle instead of perpetuating it." "And if they don't accept our refusal?" His smile was grim but determined. "Then they learn the same lesson the Ravagers did." "Humanity doesn't just hunt monsters, Sarah. We hunt the things that create monsters." The communication ended, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of knowledge that would reshape humanity's role in the galaxy once again. They had proven they could eliminate any threat to galactic civilization. Now they would have to prove they could resist becoming the threat themselves. Outside her window, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the struggles of the species that crawled across worlds in their light. But for the first time in galactic history, those species had guardians who understood that survival required more than good intentions. It required the willingness to become what others feared, so that others could remain what they aspired to be. The galaxy had asked humanity for killers. What they had received were protectors who understood that sometimes protection required killing, and in the vast darkness between stars, other ancient intelligences watched and waited to see what humanity would do with the terrible gift of their own nature.